My name is Karen Penfold. I've hopefully met quite a few of you before at different events, seminars, or spoken to you over the phone. I'm Head of Human Resources for Code and managing the over 2,500 members that call in. It's a very busy helpline, and we deal with all sorts of HR issues and support there. So one thing we wanted to talk to you about today is something really exciting. This is actually the unveiling of this today. We haven't talked about this yet. And this is our upcoming events. We actually have coming up 9 events that start in September. And we have, this is our CQC update days, which are very popular with members before. We've got 2 dates this time. We're actually running 2, one in London and one in Birmingham, September and March. We're also running a HIW update day in Cardiff. And the biggest thing that we've decided to do, and this is with on popular requests as well, we're always being asked if we could do something like this. And this is, we're going to be delivering some practice manager conference events. And this essentially, we're providing the best speakers at these events to help you with your essential practice management. And if you actually want to book any of these events, you can actually go online today. We've got the website there, codeuk.com/events, or you can give the office a call on 01409 254 354 to be able to book your place there, because they are quite popular. We also wanted to take this opportunity today to really thank you from behalf of the Code team for those members that have been referring us. We've seen a huge increase in referrals, resulting in new members coming on board with us, and it's really appreciated. I'm going to touch on later with Alex is going to be doing a webinar next, and he'll be talking to you about our inspection, our research that we've done with how many practices with iComply are passing. We have a really high pass rate, so he'll go into more detail with that in the next webinar. Okay. So for the webinar today, I'm just going to talk about some aims and objectives. So the aim of this particular one, we're covering maternity, is to help practices increase their understanding of maternity rights, comply with legislation, and avoid making some common mistakes, which can be quite costly. So the objectives will be to highlight the risks around pregnancy and maternity discrimination, and to discuss an overview of maternity rights, leave and pay. We're also going to explore how the iComply system provides useful policies and template letters to help practices comply with their legal obligations. Okay, so your learning outcomes, what we'd like to achieve from today's webinar, is to avoid those potentially costly mistakes when dealing with pregnant team members, and to improve the understanding of maternity leave entitlements in your practice, some training for all of you, those that deal with pregnant team members, and to understand the risk assessment in relation to pregnant and new mums with team members side of things, and what your obligations are there. Okay, so I know it's a lot to get through in a short amount of time, which is why I'm only covering maternity. I might touch on some paternity, but I won't be able to have time, unfortunately, to cover shared parental leave and those types of leave, but we will be looking at some of those policies later. So the session content today, what I've tried to do is, because this is one of probably the top topics that we receive calls on our members helpline with maternity and asking some questions. So I've tried to structure the webinar around those types of questions and break it down into the very beginning, when you're advised that your team member is pregnant, through the middle section through to the end, and how you support them while they're on maternity leave and that return to work. So we're going to look at arrangements for new and expectant mothers, confirming maternity leave arrangements as well, and that will also include looking at cover and how you handle annual leave accrual. That's a popular question we get asked. Maintaining contact during maternity leave, and we'll touch on kit days, if those of you that are familiar with those, and managing the return to work process, which is a crucial, sensitive stage as well. We'll look at summing it up at the end with looking at summary of maternity rights, leave and pay, and looking at some useful policies and templates that we have for those members on iComply application. Okay, so again, a lot to get through. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end as well. So I want to start with the Equality Act 2010. Now, this is, those of you that may have seen me before at seminars and webinars, I always bring up the Equality Act 2010 because it does actually run through most of employment law at some point. And it's important to note that there are 9 protected characteristics in the Equality Act. What we are looking at is, just remember that pregnancy and maternity are actually 2 protected characteristics under the Equality Act 2010. And what it comes down to, they're protected to not be treated detrimental or to be dismissed because they are pregnant or due to go on maternity leave. And what I really want to highlight here, this is the one part this part of legislation actually covers self-employed associates as well. Self-employed team members are protected by this this law, so be aware of that. And we'll look at that a bit further on as well. So arrangements for new and expectant mothers. When we talk about new, this is, just to clarify, this is a mum that has given birth in the last 6 months, and has returned to work and may still be breastfeeding. So just to clarify that this applies to them. So what I want to start with is really looking at when you're first aware that a team member is advising you if they're pregnant, is to consider their well-being. The first step is to, how are they? Talk to them. How is it their first pregnancy? What support they may need and how they're feeling as well from that point of view. What support network do they have there? The next step, and we do have on our code guidance, we have the arrangements of new and expectant mothers, a template on there that also breaks this down that you can refer to. But what's important to note, and when I receive that phone call on the helpline, if we get asked, they've told me I'm pregnant, what am I supposed to do? The first step is to actually look at your original risk assessment, your general risk assessment. Now this is, I think people get confused that they think that they have to do a specific risk assessment just for a pregnant employee. Actually, legally, your obligation is to have a general risk assessment in place, but which should actually incorporate risks that apply to pregnant mums, new mothers as well. So that should already be incorporated into your general risk assessment. And our template on iComply does actually have that in there. So, but what you will need to do when you know an employee is pregnant, you need to go back and review that risk assessment, because there may be different risks now since when you did that particular one. And things to consider for them is, if you're a practice, for example, that's on different floors and levels, it may be looking at, as their pregnancy progresses, how difficult is it for them to get up and down the stairs? Is there a lot on their feet all day? Are they exposed to any chemicals and those types of, and how can you reduce that risk? And it may be that you just need to look at maybe staggering their hours, changing their hours, or where their working location. And there's things you can do around that to consider. There's also, within this, is that providing them with a rest area. And people get confused to think they have to provide them with a whole separate room. And essentially, you need to provide them with somewhere they can go and rest, somewhere quiet, and it needs to be a suitable rest area. And that can be your staff room. It's okay to use that, as long as it's so suitable, so it needs to be close to toilets and those sorts of utilities, and also that they're able to perhaps put their feet up as well, and that even if you're having to put 2 chairs together. So it's important from that point of view that you provide all these things for them once they've advised you of their pregnancy. Okay. So let's move over to the next thing. So you've looked at their well-being. Now they need to understand what their entitlements are, what they want to know the information. So again, it comes down to making sure you communicate that they might be their first pregnancy, they might not know very much of what they're entitled to or how it works. So it's important to provide them with the maternity leave and pay policy. Now, we've mentioned here we actually have an updated policy, and at the end of today's webinar we will be emailing you a link to the updated maternity leave and pay policy, and that's been released in iComply today, but you'll be able to go and access that as well. Now, when so they've got this information, and the next thing you need to know is, when should they actually notify you of their that they are pregnant? This is linked to their eligibility for statutory maternity pay. So an employee who has worked for you for at least 26 continuous weeks, and this has to be by the expected week of childbirth, and that's the 15th week, and this is where people get confused. The expected week of childbirth is actually not the due date, it can be the Sunday of that week commencing of their due date. So an employee should notify you 15 weeks prior to their expected week of childbirth that they are actually pregnant. To actually qualify and be eligible for maternity pay, they need to have worked for you for at least 26 continuous weeks by that 15th week. They also need to notify you with 28 days notice of when they intend to take their maternity leave. and they need to have an average weekly earnings of about £113 a week at the moment. So to be able to meet that requirement to receive statutory maternity pay. Now, if an employee doesn't meet that criteria, it's important that you still support them in terms of giving them the information of where they can go, because it's likely that they'll be able to receive maternity allowance, which they can get through their job centre, and there are forms online that you can point them in the right direction to help them with that. Now, maternity leave, everyone, regardless of their length of service, as long as they're an employee, so from day one they could have just started with you and you find out they're pregnant, they are entitled to receive the 52 weeks maternity leave, which is broken down into ordinary and additional maternity leave. Now, ordinary is the first 26 weeks is your ordinary maternity leave, and additional is the second part of that, which is the 26 weeks. And it does vary on entitlements with the actual maternity pay is paid for the first 39 weeks. And I'll talk a bit more about that later, how that's calculated. Okay, I'm aware this is a lot of information, so you've given them the information, you've made sure they've had the risk assessment, and they've got somewhere to go and rest. Now it's being aware that they are actually entitled to reasonable paid time off for antenatal care. I know that word reasonable always is a struggle. What is reasonable? And it's essentially these antenatal care appointments, they aren't just appointments with their midwife or doctor, they could also be for parental classes or relaxation classes, and I am aware it does vary around the country what different hospitals and people provide and have available. There is a bit of a benchmark. They say for a first-time pregnancy, reasonable, you'd expect about 10 antenatal classes they may attend. Now, please note that this is just a benchmark, because it will really depend on how they are, how the pregnancy is progressing, if there's been any issues, and there might be something different there. So don't hold them that they're only allowed 10. It's just a benchmark for you. And it's okay for an employer to say to an employee, I need sufficient notice, at least a day's notice, to be able to accommodate these appointments. And that can be, you can ask them to make the appointments early in the morning, if they can make it first thing in the morning or in the afternoon, to try and fit around work. And you can refuse if they haven't given you enough notice and they're telling you on the day. Then if it doesn't work for the business and you're simply not able to accommodate it, then you are able to say, can you possibly reschedule? It's not, they do need it. It's about being reasonable on both sides. Now, something else that people aren't aware of, you can actually ask for proof of the appointments as well, but not for the first appointment. So that first appointment that they attend, you have to take it as a given that that's where they're going. After that, you can ask them to provide you with their medical appointment cards if you want to, if you're concerned about that, and they used to do that. Now, I'm just going to touch on the antenatal rights for fathers and partners. They are actually entitled to attend 2 unpaid antenatal appointments, which previously they didn't have that allowance. So they're unpaid, they're 2 appointments, and the duration of those appointments are capped at 6.5 hours, depending if you want to go there with them. Okay. So you've gone through the maternity leave, you've gone through the antenatal side, and you're talking to them about what they are planning to do, what they're looking to do with their maternity leave arrangements. Now, just going back to the risk assessment, what I would say is I'd recommend that they actually, that you review that risk assessment with them as the pregnancy progresses through each trimester. Because as the bump's growing, there may be different risks, or they may be having issues through their pregnancy and be exposed to different risks along the way. So it's a good idea, and to actually do that risk assessment with the employee, so you have that communication going and they feel supported, because they may see risks differently to you that you weren't aware of. So just to clarify, when is the earliest maternity leave can start? Now, going back to the eligibility side, they need to provide you with a MAP B1 form or a medical note certificate from their midwife or doctor to confirm their pregnancy, to be eligible again to meet the maternity leave and the SMP payments. Now, you'd normally expect to receive that from the employee when they're at about 21 to 22 weeks pregnant. So you should expect to ask for that MAP B1 form then. Now, the earliest maternity leave can actually start, now bearing in mind if an employee wishes to and you haven't got any health and safety concerns or risks, they can work right up to the expected week of childbirth if they want to do that. If essentially the earliest they can actually start is 11 weeks prior to the expected week of childbirth, that mouthful again, so when the baby is due, that week commencing the baby is due. If, however, they are off work 4 weeks prior to that, that expected week of childbirth that week, and it's related to pregnancy-related sickness, you can insist that their maternity leave starts then. So if they're signed off then. So they've decided that's when they've advised when they're looking to start the maternity leave, they need to give you that 28 days notice in writing of when they're looking to start that. And then we do have we have a really useful letter on maternity leave as well, and acknowledging maternity leave arrangements, and iComply, which I'll give you the reference for later. So once you know they're pregnant and that's been confirmed and you know when they're looking to start their maternity leave, it's important to start thinking about how you're going to cover that position and involve the person in that as well, as it might be interested. And it may mean that you need to advertise, and again, going back to the Equality Act, it's important that you advertise the position that it is maternity cover only, just in case, and then it's very clear that it's for a fixed term contract. Now, our contracts our staff contracts that you would issue we have the template for fixed term maternity cover arrangements, which also, if the employee decides they want to return to work earlier than the 52 weeks, you have the option in that contract to advise the covering person that cover may end earlier than what was originally agreed in the fixed contract. Now, something to consider, rather you might not have to recruit or get temporary cover. Maybe it's an opportunity to look at what skills team members you have within. Is it something you can absorb or use somebody as a development tool? Could somebody step up and cover that position for that period of time? And that can actually work quite well as well if that's something you can accommodate, just thinking of different ways of doing things. Now, it's also, this is a question that comes up so much on the helpline, is around annual leave accrual. So just to make it clear, when a woman goes on maternity leave, all of their benefits remain exactly the same. They're entitled to everything they would as if they were working, including their annual leave. So the only thing that changes is actually their salary, the rate of their salary. That's the only thing that should be affected. So annual leave accrual, if you have a woman who's perhaps starting their maternity in June, you'd look at what annual leave they've accrued from, say, January to June, if your holiday year runs from January to December, and calculate whatever they've used already. But if they have a lump that they want to take, now they have that option to either use it before their maternity leave or add it on to the end of their maternity leave when they finish their additional, for example. And it might be that if they start using that holiday accrual before they start maternity, something to bear in mind, if they actually have the baby during that period, then automatically their maternity leave starts and the annual leave goes back into the pot so they don't lose it. And during the maternity leave that they're on, if it's 52 weeks or whatever period they decide to take, they actually accrue annual leave for that entire period, and then they have the option at the end to take it as to extend their actual additional maternity leave, or they may decide to do a phased return to work and use it up that way. So bear in mind, it's not something you should be paying them in a lump sum at the end of their maternity, even though I recognise that's something both employers and employees would probably like. But the only time that you can actually pay a lump sum of annual leave is if someone is actually leaving, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So contact during maternity leave, and I think this is so important for both employers and employees that they're not forgotten about, because this is where it can be an innocent mistake that's made, that someone is forgotten about on maternity leave, and that's where employers could be exposed to making those mistakes of potentially discrimination, or suddenly find themselves being accused of not treating them fairly or putting them at a detriment. An example of that, I did have a call from a practice some time ago where they had innocently updated their website and changed all their website, brand new website, and actually removed this person who was on maternity leave from the website, their photograph, everything about them. And again, it wasn't intentional, they were just forgotten about. However, this person then lodged that they were being discriminated against, and there was an issue there, and it was resolved in the end. But it just shows you how easy it is to just make that a simple mistake and then find yourselves being exposed. So it's really important to encourage conversations before the woman goes on maternity leave. Talk about how they might want to remain in contact, what's reasonable. And I also recommend agree how they want the contact made. So it might be that they say, well, actually, I prefer it if you just sent me an email with updates of what's happening in work, particularly if there are any promotions going on, any development opportunities. You need to make sure that someone on maternity leave is fully aware of those opportunities as well. Otherwise, you could be subjecting yourselves to being at risk of a discrimination claim. So agree before, say, okay, we'll arrange, I'll send you an email, we'll tell you what's going on in the practice, every other month that'll be there. And then when they're ready, depending on what things are going with the baby, they can read that email and come back to you. And it's also keeps things in loop that they are aware of. They can have these keeping in touch days, which we call kit days, and they are 10 kit days altogether. Now, it's important that you know that they're not compulsory, and they need to be mutually agreed by both the employer and employee to attend. A lot of women like to option to use them at the end, coming up to the end of their maternity leave, when they're thinking about returning to work. Now, this is the only time women on maternity leave can be paid their normal pay for that day, other than SMP. So you can't keep coming off and on it, but you've got 10 days there where they can actually be paid their normal hourly rate. So if you've got the option to take a kit day, and what it's really useful for is if you've got a training that you want everybody to attend and you've only got the trainer in for that one day, you can put that information out there and ask them if they like to attend that particular day, and also they get paid their normal rate for that day. So in the policy that gives them all the information, it comes back again to communication, making sure they're aware of this entitlement. Okay, so we're looking at managing the return to work process, which is also a really key part of the process of retention as well. If you want somebody who's really good, they've been on maternity leave, you want them to come back to work. You need to work on the assumption that they are taking their full entitlement of 52 weeks unless they're telling you otherwise, and you can't ask them if they're not planning to do that, but they need to advise you in 8 weeks notice in writing if they're planning to come back earlier than their return to work and that 52 weeks. Now bear in mind, if an employee has decided they don't want to return to work and actually they're looking to leave, they need to give you notice as any employee would who's resigning, and they need to give you the contractual notice that's in there, refer to that contract if they're looking to do that. What I'd recommend doing is when they are wanting to come back to work, and this can be discussions that you have on the kit days as well, that they are willing to just start talking to you about. Now, everybody has the right now, as long as they meet the criteria of having 26 weeks continuous service, they can make a request to their employer to change their working hours, and that's a flexible working request. And we have this on iComply application as well, a good policy about which procedure you need to follow. Just bearing in mind, if anyone who I know I'm talking about lots of policies on iComply, if you do want to book a demo, we've got just put something in the chat box and notify us, and a professional services advisor will be in touch with you to arrange that. So I'm aware that I'm talking a lot about different policies on there. So follow your flexible working request as soon as they have said to you that they're looking to come back on reduced hours, changing their working pattern, and work through that request with them. Send them the application, give them all the information before they go on leave if that's easier, so that everybody knows what the process is and what they need to do, and the important thing, the time frames as well. So bearing in mind, they have the entitlement to return to their original job. Now, if they take the 26 weeks ordinary maternity leave and they return after that, they are entitled to come back to the same job that they left. So exactly the same job, same everything about that. That should be kept open for them. If they decide and they opt to take the additional maternity leave, it's important to note that that means you still need to make sure they have the job to come back to, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same position. But what it does need to be is a suitable alternative. So the same responsibility, the same status, the same level of pay, but not necessarily exactly the same job. So you have that option with those two types of leave. Okay. So maternity and the self-employed, this is something, and we get a lot of calls on this, and it goes back to making sure that you're aware that the self-employed associates are protected under the Equality Act to not be at a detriment because they are pregnant or going on maternity leave. So even though they're not covered under a maternity policy, for example, and not entitled to that type of leave, they still are able and should be able to return to their work, their contract. So the contract that you have with them, you should keep open and agree with them before how they want to make that, how you want to cover that contract. When are they looking to go on leave? It comes back to communication. And there may be, this is associates that working on a fully private practice with no NHS. And I really encourage that they talk to you about how long they're looking to take in terms of the duration of leave, and notify you at least a month before. Ideally, they should notify you as soon as they feel comfortable that they are pregnant, because of the health and safety aspect. So you still need to refer to your risk assessment and making sure that you've got those measures and controls in place for any risks that may apply to them. It's to keep that communication. They can also advise of when they're looking to return. There's no statutory amount of leave that a private associate can take. There's no benchmark, but it's a good idea to balance it in line with what's reasonable. And you may want to consider, I think the best practice would be in line with actually what employees covered by maternity legislation at the moment. So you've got to give them that right to take 52 weeks if it works, but also talk about how they're going to keep that contract and the cover going during that period. And agree that in writing as well up front, so you all understand that and keep that contact in place. Those associates that are working on part NHS contracts, there's different. They are if they're eligible, and the criteria does change with England and Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland. It's slightly different. So there is eligibility criteria for statutory maternity pay for 26 weeks, and that can be as long as they've been on the performers list for 2 years. So that's some of the criteria, but I won't go into too much detail because it does vary, and if you do need to know information about that, then you can give us a call. So, okay, so I just want to summarise some of the key points, because I know it's a lot of information, which is why we're going to release the policy today as well, the updated policy, so you have that to refer to while it's fresh in your mind. So pregnant employees have the right to 52 weeks maternity leave, which is made up of your 26 weeks ordinary maternity leave and 26 weeks additional maternity leave. Now during that period, so those that are eligible, and that comes back to making sure that they've given you the right notice, that they provided their MAP-B1 form, their proof of pregnancy, that they have worked for you for 26 weeks by the expected week of childbirth, and the average weekly earnings. Now they would meet the requirements of the statutory maternity pay, and that is actually paid for 39 weeks. Now the first 6 weeks they receive at 90% of their full pay from there, and then going forward it drops down. At the moment we've just had the increase in April, you may have seen on our news items that we sent out, that it's now gone up to £140, £98 a week. So from there. Now, bearing in mind, and again, we get a lot of calls on this from employers, you can reclaim back 92% of the maternity pay that you pay out. And those employers that qualify for small business relief can actually claim back the full 100%. So that's something to be aware of. Now, going back, the other summary point, they have the right to reasonable paid time off for antenatal care, including parental classes, relaxation classes, and it's important to communicate that to them. It's about reasonable, giving you notice and talking about it with them with your maternity policy, so fully aware of that process. During maternity leave, the employee is entitled to receive all contractual benefits except remuneration. This is the word I can never say, except their salary. And everything else they are fully entitled to, particularly remembering that they will accrue annual leave. And you may be in a situation, if they've taken their full 52 weeks, that they've accrued a huge, their chunk of annual leave, and they need to add that on to the end of how they can gradually use that, and that phased return to work is a good way of doing that. Pregnant employees and self-employed associates are both protected against unfair treatment and discrimination under the Equality Act. So bear in mind, think about how you treat your associates who advise you their pregnancy status as well. And they all have the right to return to either their original job if they're returning after ordinary maternity leave, or a suitable alternative if they've decided to take the full entitlement and they're coming back after their additional maternity leave. Okay, again, a lot of facts, I know. So I mentioned, again, it's a top topic on that we receive on our member helpline, and we do have a lot of policies on here as well, including all the different types of leave, the shared parental leave that's there, we've got a policy on that one, family friendly rights, paternity and adoption is also there, and what's a really useful letter is the letter acknowledging maternity leave. And this is structured so you're completely covered, that you've covered every aspect of their rights, what they need to do, because if you don't advise an employee who's on maternity leave that they have to give you 8 weeks notice to return earlier, then they can actually, if they haven't been told that and it's not in writing anywhere, they can actually come back early and contest that they weren't aware. So be aware of this, is why this template is so useful. And it's and again, if those of you who haven't got iComply application, if you would like a demo today, then we please let us know in the chat box, and our advisors will be in touch with you to arrange that today as well. Okay. Bearing in mind there'll be another policy coming up on topping that up. I don't know if those of you are aware, in the news you may have seen, there's also grand parental leave that's coming in place now. And that's going to probably be in place, legislation that's going through at the moment. That will be coming out in next April 2018. And that, I think it is a reflection of how many people are working a lot longer now, and also parents, working parents are so reliant on their own parents to help them with childcare for that affordability. I know I am. I rely on my mum, so it's that's going to come in, and whether there'll be much take up, because the shared parental leave has been quite slow at the moment, but it's something to be aware of. So there'll be more information and policies coming through once that's gone through. So something to think about for you all for next week. I would just have we're releasing the new maternity leave and pay policy today. It was mentioned after the webinar. But also just make sure if you're not with ourselves, make sure you've got an up-to-date policy in place, and that it gives all the information that employee needs to know, and also your team members that may be dealing with pregnant employees. Look at those that are on maternity leave at the moment. Think about, are you maintaining contact with them? Do they know what's happening in the workplace? Do they know if there's any opportunities for new roles, promotions? Making sure that you're keeping them in touch as well, and that they know about the kit days, and try and encourage, if you can, without putting too much pressure, encourage to see that they are, there's a really useful tool to help people integrate back into work after being away for a period of time with their baby. So, and going back to, so many practices tend to not do this, I know from speaking to members, is to follow your flexible working application procedure. Follow that if you've got somebody wanting to come back on reducing their working time and pattern, and I know sometimes you can't accommodate it. If you're using the flexible working application, it will help you work through that step by step with them, making sure that you are reducing any risks of discriminating against them by not considering their request properly, and also making sure you record it and communicate it. So I strongly recommend you make sure you're familiar with that policy. Okay. So I mentioned earlier our upcoming events. We're going to be doing different HR topics at these events as well. So have another look. We've got the dates there now that we're happy finally be able to release today, and we